Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to another video and thank you for joining me today. So in this video today we're going to be covering something a little bit different. We're going to be covering the Australian media landscape and what's the impact with Google, Facebook and the Australian government. So the main reason I'm covering this video is because I live and work in Australia and I also work in digital marketing, so it's definitely impacting me directly for certain situations. It's also indirectly impacting a lot of Australians who get their news from Facebook, and basically how Facebook has now changed the situation with Australian media and journalistic outlets. So let's get into this whole situation and let me explain a bit of the background and what has occurred and where we are today. So let's get into it. So essentially what has occurred is that the Australian government asked the ACCC, which is the Australian Competition Consumer Commission, to essentially draft up a piece of legislation, which is a media bargaining code. And this code is proposing to get Google and Facebook to pay for journalistic content that they use on the platforms. And essentially, as you can imagine, didn't really go down too well. But before I get into that, let me explain the precursor behind this. So for those who do not live in Australia or follow Australian media and news, over the last several years, especially over the last 10 years, readership of traditional media such as magazines, newspapers have been on the decline, like it has primarily around the world since the internet has taken over as the main key source of information. So other factors that have occurred, there's been many significant layoffs across many sectors, including journalism. Primarily we've seen big layoffs of hundreds of journalists across such media publications as BuzzFeed and Fairfax Media, to name a few. Other factors that contributed to this is the changing media landscape. The way people consume media, the way people consume news has changed. So what we've seen is that people have shifted away from mainstream media and now they're getting their news from social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and other alternative media sources. Also, another thing that's contributed to this decline is also the way that the traditional journalistic model, it doesn't really work well in the digital landscape. And also people aren't always willing to pay money for subscription fees to get media such as news, which has been traditionally free or at a very low amount of money. And I'm not saying that a lot of these subscriptions are high amounts of money, but a lot of people don't want to pay for this. They'd rather just get it somewhere else for free. So moving along, with that in mind, there's been a lot of negativity. And then with coronavirus kicking in early 2020, it's sped up the process of a lot of negativity in that industry. And also with the timing of this bargaining code that has come out, Google and Facebook in early 2021 both responded and provided separate threats to this situation. So the main thing that Google has suggested is to opt out of being in the Australian market and basically removing the Australian search engine variation of google.com.au from Australia. While on the other hand, Facebook decided to threaten Australia and say, hey, we're not going to be in this market, we're not going to be able to, provide access to these publications to use our platforms. So essentially trying to bar Australian media outlets. So those are the situations from January 2021 until today, 18th of February. So what has happened in this time? So essentially what has occurred is something really interesting and yet bizarre. So on one hand, Google has actually went with these large publishers and have opted to create contracts and deals that will pay journalists for the content that Google uses. So that's a win-win from that situation. They've also created a new product. There's not too much details around it, but it's called Google Showcase, and it'll be a way to benefit not only publishers but also users of Google to get monetization, specifically for the publishers to get monetized for the content that Google uses. So that's something that's interesting that Google has actually done. And at this point, they've actually struck a deal with 7 Media, or I should say 7 West Media, and also with 9 Entertainment. So these are 2 very large conglomerates of Rupert Murdoch's media empire, essentially. So that means that hopefully a lot more money will be coming through to journalists who need this money, and hopefully it will create a better situation for them. Well, on the flip side, one negative thing that has occurred is that Facebook has actually barred news publications from sharing their content on their platform. And digging a little bit deeper into that, one thing that's really crazy is actually blocked Australian users from sharing Australian media content, and it's also blocked international users from sharing and viewing Australian media content. And on top of that, it's blocked these media publications from being able to share their own posts on Facebook. So this is essentially a world first that we're seeing here, and this is quite a concern. So on one hand, you have Google actually capitulating to a degree and helping journalists, and then at the same time you have Facebook leaving Australia. Really? So what does this mean for the Australian media landscape? Well, if I was an Australian publisher, I don't think it would be much value of actually even having an Australian Facebook profile from that perspective, because you can't do anything on it, you're barred. You know, so that's really bizarre, and it's a world first, and it's a negative thing. So definitely I feel that there will be a mass exodus of Australian users off the Facebook platform, I believe. And also at the same time, it's just going to have a negative connotation with Australia, and I think it might deteriorate and might create other problems in the future for Facebook. While on the other hand, Google's actually taken this in their stride and created a better situation. But what's actually interesting, and I wanted to quickly talk about this, is I had a discussion with a friend, checking the DM here on Facebook. We were talking about this topic when it first came out on Jan 22nd of Google threatening to leave Australia, and my consensus at that time was essentially that Google wasn't actually going to leave. And luckily enough, I was correct about that, because considering that I'm operating as a digital marketer who heavily relies on Google, especially running and operating with SEO, definitely it would make my job much more difficult, and definitely it would basically just create a big vacuum in the Australian media landscape. I definitely feel like DuckDuckGo and Bing would probably flourish a bit more if that were to occur. So definitely, you know, Google did the smart decision and ended up working with publishers and working with the government. Well, I believe that now this could possibly be the beginning of the end for Facebook. So definitely this situation will be evolving over time, and I believe that more and more Australian publishers will sign multi-million-dollar deals with Google to ensure that they get monetized for the content that Google's using. And I'm not too certain that the future will be bright for Facebook. So I wanted to quickly put this video together because I know that a lot of things have been occurring, especially today on the 18th of February. There's been a lot of crazy situations in the Australian media landscape, but I felt that putting this video together is very important just to communicate not only to my Australian audience, but to my global audience as well. So thank you so much guys for tuning in, and definitely I'll be putting up some more SEO videos in the next few days, few weeks. So thank you guys so much again, and don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe and share this video. So have a good one guys, and chat to you soon. Bye.